Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. We're back with another installment of memorable cars in Gran Turismo. You know, over the past few years, I've covered a lot of strange and fascinating machines throughout this series, so it's honestly kind of amazing that there are still many that I've yet to talk about. The theme of today's video is cars that hold a unique place within Gran Turismo history. Effectively, we're not just looking at cars that are quirky and interesting, but cars that are quirky and interesting in ways like no other car that's ever appeared in this series. This can be through their inherent characteristics and features, or even specific ways in which they were implemented into the games. We've got an eclectic mix of models to get through, so let's dive in. Our first example takes us to Gran Turismo 2, always fertile ground when it comes to intriguing vehicles. There are plenty of cars in this game that never reappeared in any future titles, ranging from ordinary commuters to high-performance monsters. Generally, the cars in the latter group are pretty well remembered, but there is one that I don't think gets talked about very often. The Suzuki Cultus Pikes Peak version is a special model that you can only find in GT2. As the name implies, this car was designed to race at the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, with a shortened version of said course also making its one and only appearance in this game. Now, for anyone who's played GT2, the reason why the Cultus gets somewhat forgotten is pretty obvious. This car was succeeded by the Suzuki Escudo Pikes Peak version, a model which also debuted in GT2, and just so happens to be the de facto fastest car in the entire game. Its legendary status was further cemented by future appearances in the PS2 and PS3 games, and it was even brought back to the series in super high fidelity with Gran Turismo 7. Saying all this, it's easy to see why the Cultus isn't as fondly remembered. In GT2, it's effectively just a less extreme version of the Escudo. Whilst it does have some pretty radical aero, it just doesn't look as aggressive as its younger brother, and performance-wise it's also noticeably slower. But despite this, it still costs the same amounts, 2 million credits, and there's no way to win it as a prize car either. When you put all of this together, there is basically no reason to ever use this car over the Escudo. In fact, until I started work on this video, I had never even driven it before, and I think that most GT2 players are in the same boat. However, as per the theme of this video, there is one detail that sets this car apart from not just the Escudo, but every other car that's ever appeared in this series. This detail relates to its engine, or should I say, engines. Yes, in real life, this car is a twin-engine design, having a turbocharged 1.6-litre unit in the front, and another in the back. This setup is totally unparalleled when it comes to cars in Gran Turismo. The Escudo, for instance, employs a single twin-turbo V6 to make its power. Of course, the Pikes Peak Cultus is not the only twin-engine car to ever exist in real life. Another notable example is the Mark II Volkswagen Golf that also raced at Pikes Peak a handful of times in the 80s. This layout is very useful when trying to maximize power within a compact body. When combined, the Cultus's two engines make about 800 horsepower, roughly 200 less than the Escudo, but still pretty damn impressive. Each engine powers one of the axles, making it four-wheel drive, and as it weighs less than 900 kilos, acceleration is rapid, certainly better than any of the non-hill climb cars in this game. In the corners, it is definitely more prone to understeer than the mid-engine Escudo, but the bottom line is that it's still good enough to win every single race that it's eligible for in the career. Well, with the exception of the final Pikes Peak hill climb race against the Escudo. It is technically still possible with a skilled driver, but this head-to-head really highlights the car's disadvantages. Interestingly, the theme of this car being unfairly overshadowed extends to its real-life story. The twin-engine Cultus first appeared at the mountain in 1989, with Nobuhiro Monster Tajima at the wheel, and just 4 years later, it had evolved into the bewinged beast that we all know from GT2. At that point, the overall record at Pikes Peak was held by Ari Vatanen, which he set in a Peugeot 405 T16 in 1988, a run that was made famous by the Climb Dance film. And in 1993, who became the first person to beat Vatanen's legendary run? Well, none other than Monster Tajima and his twin-engine Cultus, with a time of 10 minutes and 44.22 seconds. However, this new record would only stand for a matter of minutes, as it was just beaten by a car in the open-wheel division. Ultimately, Tajima and Suzuki would have to wait a couple more years for their first overall victory at the mountain, but the fact remains that for the briefest period, this Cultus was a Pikes Peak record holder, even if the record book itself doesn't show it. In some ways, I do wonder what might have happened had the Cultus been the only Pikes Peak special that appeared in GT2. Would it be held in the same regard as its red replacement currently is? I kinda doubt it. After all, whilst it is still one of the fastest cars in GT2, it just doesn't have the same game-breaking speed as the Escudo. However, in that scenario, I still think that the Cultus would get more recognition than it currently does. I mean, did you even know that this car had 2 engines before I mentioned it? There's a decent chance that you didn't, such as the degree to which this model has been put in the shade. But hey, cars like the Pikes Peak Cultus are the exact reason why I love making videos like these. When it comes to records within Gran Turismo, such as the car with the most power or the highest top speed, it feels like we're far from reaching the ceiling of what's possible. This is in part thanks to the fictional concept cars of Vision Gran Turismo, but also the ever-expanding potential of real-world electric vehicles. However, there is one record in this series that I'm confident will never be broken. First appearing in Gran Turismo 4, this is the Leno Tank Car, a custom-built hot rod sporting an engine taken from an M47 Patton tank. This almost 30-litre V12 is the biggest engine fitted to any vehicle found in these games, and the tank car itself is also the longest and heaviest car in the entire series. Unsurprisingly, this car is considered a special vehicle in GT4, and so can't be used in any single-player races. There are a couple of interesting details regarding this car's inclusion. For example, its name. Jay Leno is of course a famous US TV personality and avid car collector, and Tank Car obviously refers to where its engine came from. However, the official name of this car in real life is the Blastoline Special, as christened by its creator, Randy Grubb. Originally built in 2001, the car was sold to Jay Leno a couple of years later, who then performed some modifications. As he's mentioned before in interviews, the inclusion of this car in GT4 was kind of incidental. Apparently, the Gran Turismo team visited his garage to record some engine sounds, but when they saw the tank car, they were so fascinated by it that they decided to include it in the game as well. As such, the version in GT4 is the upgraded 2003 spec, and I guess that's why in-game it appears under the Jay Leno brand, with no mention of its actual name. As for how it drives, it's honestly a lot better than you might expect. It's not exactly nimble, but when driving in bumper cam, I find that it's easy to forget that it weighs 3.5 tons. In some ways, I think that GT4's twitchy handling model actually helps it. The immense power and torque can cause excessive wheel spin, but overall, I'd say its performance is comparable to an entry-level sports car, if not better. As well as having the biggest car in the series, GT4 also features the narrowest circuits, Città d'Aria. Really, if you haven't tried to thread the tank car through these twisty Italian streets, I recommend giving it a go. It's an experience unlike anything else in Gran Turismo. The tank car would reappear in the PS3 games, where it can be used much more freely. In GT5, you get it as a prize car for completing the A-Spec American Championship, so most players will end up with it in their garage at some point. Although there are no special vehicle limitations in this game, the tank car is still very much a novelty. Performance point wise, it's quite overrated, meaning that in arcade mode, it gets matched up with high-end sports cars and supercars that it simply can't keep up with. Still, it's a lot of fun to mess around with, which is what most people ended up doing with it anyway. Beyond 2003, the real car was further upgraded with twin turbochargers, and is said to make around 1600 horsepower. Sadly, this was never reflected in Gran Turismo. If it were, this would have made it the most powerful car in GT4 and GT5, being even more potent than the Red Bull X cars. The tank car is one of those true oddities in Gran Turismo. There is nothing else even remotely like it in these games. Not only can it not be used in single-player races in GT4, it can't even enter certain photo travel locations due to its size. And also because of that, in GT5, its oil change animation looks like this. The tank car stands as a monument to doing something not because it's easy or because it makes sense, but simply because you can. That mantra applies to not only its creation in real life, but also how it ended up in Gran Turismo at all. There are many cars in this series that we can look at and say they deserve better. Whether they were cars that were underutilized, cars that were overshadowed by other models like we've already seen, or simply cars that were left in the series past. In most cases, these are the result of specific design choices by Polyphony, but there is one example where things were completely out of their hands. Gran Turismo for the PSP is a game that I rarely talk about on this channel, mainly because it isn't very relevant to the topics I usually cover. That said, it did introduce a few new cars, such as the Ferrari Enzo and Bugatti Veyron. Another new addition was this, the Mazda Furai concept. Built on the chassis of a Courage LMP2 car, the Furai was part of a design study for Mazda's future road cars. It was powered by a highly tuned R20B 3-rotor engine making around 450 horsepower, and when combined with its low curb weight of just 675 kilograms, made it quite a track weapon, both in the game and in real life. Fast forward to Gran Turismo 5 the following year and the Furai would return. However, it wasn't made into a PS3 spec premium model, but rather retained its less detailed PSP form. Now this phenomenon wasn't exclusive to the Furai. Various cars that debuted in GT PSP, including the Veyron, were not updated for GT5. Even so, it was still a shame to see a car as beautiful as this one be rendered to a lower standard. In-game, the performance of the Furai is still very impressive. It can easily hold its own against prototypes that have almost twice as much power. As well as the lottery that is the used car dealership, you can get this car by winning the B-Spec Roadster Cup event. This means that if you decide to do B-Spec first, you can use this car to completely break the game. The Roadster Cup is a level 6 event, but the Furai is a level 23 car. You don't need to work out the maths on that one. In real life, after being unveiled in 2008 with much fanfare, the Furai disappeared from public view shortly after. Well, in September 2013, it was revealed that the real car had been destroyed when its engine caught fire during a photo shoot for Top Gear magazine. All that was left were these charred remains that were collected by Mazda, the fate of which in current day is still unknown. Later in 2013, Gran Turismo 6 came out, and whilst a number of PSP carryovers, like the Veyron, were remade with full premium models, the Furai was unsurprisingly not one of them. The real-life incident which claimed the car took place in August 2008, but its first appearance in Gran Turismo PSP didn't come until well over a year later. As far as I can tell, this makes it the only car in this series to be modelled for one of these games, but then have its sole example destroyed in real life before it actually appeared. Of course, Gran Turismo isn't alone in this respect, as the Furai was featured in a few other racing games shortly after its death, notably Race Driver Grid and Forza Motorsport 3, included as DLC in both cases. As these were console titles, this meant that the car was modelled to a much higher standard for them, including a full cockpit view. Gran Turismo meanwhile was stuck with their low-res PSP model, and as the real car was now just a pile of ashes, there wasn't much they could do about it. Another difference in terms of its appearance in these games is the paint. This car is available in 12 different colours, 11 of which being fictional paints with a Gran Turismo prefix. The unnamed first option reflects the car's real colour scheme, satin black with red accents. However, even this isn't totally accurate, as it's missing its basic livery as well as sponsor decals. I'm not entirely sure why this is the case, since most other games where it appears include these with no issues. As a result of the car's popularity, the Furai has continued to feature in racing games, most recently the Forza Motorsport reboot by way of a DLC pack in May of 2025. But as far as Gran Turismo is concerned, this car has been MIA ever since GT6. You have to wonder, if the Furai had gotten a premium model back on the PS3, would we still have it in the series in current day? I think that it's entirely possible. The fact that it no longer really exists means that modelling it from scratch to the standards which we now expect from this series seems unlikely. However, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. In the PS3 games, we also saw the Isuzu 4200R. This was a long-forgotten concept car that in real life had been destroyed almost 2 decades prior, albeit intentionally. Using reference images, as well as guidance from one of the car's original designers, the 4200R was meticulously modelled and effectively brought back to life through Gran Turismo. It's a really interesting story, one that I've covered in more detail in a previous video. But my point is that I don't see why the same process couldn't also be used on the Furai one day. It may be a long shot, but if there was ever another extinct concept car worthy of this treatment, I think that it should be this one. The Mazda Furai captured people's hearts and minds in a way that most other concept cars could only dream of. It's a really unique thing, and so the fact that it holds a unique place within Gran Turismo history only adds to its mystique. When it comes to showcasing the history of automobiles, Gran Turismo 4 is still the game that does this the best. GT4 includes cars from almost every era, dating back to the very first pre-war designs. Understandably, pretty much all of the models from before the 1950s are, well, slow. Most aren't even allowed in any single-player races, and so the experience of driving them is just supposed to be a quirky novelty. There is, however, one major exception. The 1937 Auto Union V16 Type-C Streamline is very clearly different to the other vintage machines in this game. Based on a Grand Prix car from the era, this is a streamlined vehicle, the only one to ever appear in this series. It was built to do one thing and one thing only: go fast in a straight line. This is one of the few cars in GT4 that was added late, as it doesn't appear in the original Japanese version of the game. Everywhere else, you can either win it from the Grand Valley 300km endurance race, or buy it from the Audi Legends dealership for 500,000 credits. Interestingly, in the files of the game, you can find leftovers for an Auto Union dealership that was never used. Auto Union is the forerunner to Audi, hence why the car is considered an Audi in the final game. Whilst the real car was capable of almost 300 miles per hour, in-game you'll be lucky to crack 220, which is a bit disappointing. Furthermore, this car is also considered a special vehicle and so cannot be used in single-player races. In fact, it goes even further than that, as unlike any other special vehicle in GT4, this one has additional restrictions. It can only be driven in the power and speed mode, aka machine test, as well as on the Nürburgring Nordschleife. Side note, through my research, I found claims that this car is not considered a special vehicle on the NTSCU Greatest Hits version of GT4 specifically. I wasn't able to test this myself, but if you've played this version of the game, please let me know if this is actually true. Anyway, as the Nordschleife is the only road circuit where you can drive this thing, you will very quickly discover its unique handling traits. Being a streamlined design with wheel covers all around, naturally the front wheels don't have a huge steering angle. But in spite of this, the car can make it around corners no problem. How is this possible? Well, whilst the steering wheel may just be a suggestion, the fact that the car is so rear heavy means that a small steering input is enough to get the car to rotate around the turn through just inertia. It certainly isn't easy to control, but once you get a handle on how it works, it is possible to tame this beast. Although, be aware that because of this, counter-steering does next to nothing, so if you get into a slide, there isn't much that you can do. From reports, the tricky handling is pretty accurate to the real thing. However, what isn't so accurate is the fact that in-game, the car is listed as naturally aspirated. In real life, it was actually supercharged. In fact, this car is overall a bit of an imposter. Whilst it's listed as the 1937 Type-C Streamline, the in-game model appears to be based on a replica that was commissioned by Audi in the year 2000, and currently resides in their heritage collection. The reason why they didn't use the original car is that, in keeping with our previous entry, it no longer exists. The real Type-C Streamline was infamously destroyed during a top speed run in 1938. When travelling at close to 300 miles per hour, it was hit by a gust of wind and flipped over, with driver Bernd Rossemeyer being killed in the ensuing crash. In that sense, the Streamliner shares a trait with the Toyota 7, another car that ended up killing its driver in real life. The Auto Union was planned to return in future entries, namely GT-PSP, where its name can be found in an unused text string, and also GT5, where it's referenced as an opponent in the Cut Real Circuit Tours event. But in both cases, it didn't appear for unknown reasons. It would however get one more outing in Gran Turismo 6. Here the car's unique handling traits are once again on full display. In fact, I think it's even trickier to drive in this game than it was in GT4. It almost feels like it has rear wheel steering. Here's a fun fact: with the absence of the Ford Model T, Daimler Motor Carriage and Benz Patent Motor Wagon, the Type-C is actually the oldest car in GT6. Well, that's only if you take it as being the original car from 1937, like the game does, and not the 2000 replica. We can now also freely use this car on tracks besides the Nürburgring, as well as in single-player races. As a streamliner, the Like the Wind event at Special Stage Route X is where it feels most at home. And with a turbo kit to add some oomph, as well as a bit of slipstream assistance, this car can finally achieve what it never managed to in real life, and break the 300 miles per hour barrier. It may not have had such a happy ending in reality, but that's a nice way to send it off. Gran Turismo is no stranger to licensing complications. Whether it be the GT500 Diablo that debuted in GT3, but only in the Japanese version of the game, or their ongoing dispute with Lotus. Back when GT6 was about to come out, one car that was due to be included in it was this, the Nissan DeltaWing. Originally starting out as an IndyCar concept, the DeltaWing would eventually race at the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2012, under Garage 56 as an experimental car. The DeltaWing had already been seen in screenshots, trailers, and even playable demos for the game, but just a month before GT6 was due to release, it mysteriously disappeared from the official car list. In 2013, Nissan decided to end their involvement with the DeltaWing, which they were the main backers of at Le Mans in 2012, hence why it was called the Nissan DeltaWing. But at the same time, they managed to poach the car's original designer, Ben Bowlby, who they employed to design a new car to race at Le Mans. The end result was known as the Nissan Ziod RC, and its similarities to the DeltaWing were obvious. In the meantime, the original DeltaWing, now with a new Mazda-based engine, was still racing in the American Le Mans series. The DeltaWing IP was owned by Don Panos, who also happened to be the founder of the ALMS. When he learned about the Nissan Ziod, he wasn't too happy, feeling that his copyright of the DeltaWing had been infringed. As a result, he started legal proceedings against Nissan and Bowlby, and this all just so happened to take place in November of 2013. Needless to say, the DeltaWing's inclusion in GT6 was in major doubt because of this, but there was a positive resolution. Just a few days before GT6 was due to release, the official car list was once again updated, adding back the 2012 DeltaWing, but also the 2013 ALMS version. Both of these cars appeared with the Day 1 update, being listed under the DeltaWing brand. The car that was formerly known as the Nissan DeltaWing had been renamed to the DeltaWing sponsored by Nissan at Le Mans 2012. This awkward name was no doubt a result of the ongoing legal case, but the fact that it appeared in the game at all was a minor miracle. In fact, the intro to the game originally included a scene with the Nissan-sponsored car, which was then replaced with the 2013 version, even though the former was still in the game. I think this gives us some insight into how close they were to cutting the 2012 car entirely. So that's the backstory, but what are these cars like in the game? Well, both of them are ranked very highly in the performance point ratings. The more powerful 2013 version is even comparable to some Group C prototypes. However, driving it is a different matter. Back when I played this game for the first time, I remember being really disappointed with the DeltaWing. And I have to say that 12 years later, nothing has really changed. I find this car very snappy and uncontrollable in low-speed corners, but then very unresponsive and understeery in high-speed ones. It's so bad that at Daytona, you can't even go around the banking at full throttle. Now I'm sure that tuning could help with these problems, but it won't solve them entirely. Reportedly, the real car required a unique driving style. I guess that's to be expected with such an unusual design. And there are people out there who swear by this car in GT6. However, I can't crack it in the same way that I could with the Auto Union. It just feels broken. It's a real shame too, because without these handling issues, this car would be a rocket. Ultimately, for me, the DeltaWing is one of the most disappointing cars in the history of this franchise. It promised so much, but delivered so little. And I suppose that's in keeping with its real-life story. After failing to finish at Le Mans in 2012, the car was raced for 4 seasons in the ALMS, later IMSA, where it was largely unsuccessful. After that, it was retired, and that's where its story ends. In GT6, even if you can cure its handling problems, the fact that both cars are so overrated in the performance point system means that you will almost always have better options. For comparison, the 2012 DeltaWing is rated significantly higher than the Toyota TS030, an LMP1 car which qualified almost 18 seconds faster than it at Le Mans in 2012. Of course, the performance of each car in this game is not exactly the same as real life, but let me tell you, that rating is not true to the game either. The DeltaWing is an oddity, not just in real life, but also in Gran Turismo. From the legal complications surrounding its inclusion, to the way it drives and even its performance point rating, everything about it is unusual. In some regards, I wouldn't expect anything less. In this video, we've looked at a number of weird and wonderful machines, so you're probably thinking that I've saved the best for last. Well, this final entry is a little bit different, and as such, requires a bit of an explanation. So, Gran Turismo 3. Longtime viewers should already know that this game is my favourite in the entire series. Whilst it has significantly less content in terms of cars and tracks than any of the other games outside of the original, it boasts an impressive level of quality in every aspect. The fact that this game came out in 2001 still blows my mind. But more importantly, it's what the game does with its limited content that I find so special. In most GT games, you don't really have a reason to engage with the majority of the cars over the course of a playthrough. Arguably, in some of these titles, there are just so many that it simply wouldn't be possible, at least not without making the main career thousands of hours long. The beauty of GT3 is that they were able to make use of pretty much every single car within this game in one form or another. Whether it be given out as a prize, or the designated car for a certain license test, or even just an AI opponent in one of the events, by playing through this game, you will experience almost every make and model in it in some way. It's exactly this reason why GT3 still manages to be a full Gran Turismo experience in spite of its reduced roster. Is this game guilty of sometimes overusing these cars? Absolutely, but I still prefer this over the inverse problem. Anyway, one day I got a bit curious and decided to test my hypothesis by checking how many of the 180 so cars in this game get used for different things. My criteria was what I've already outlined: prize car, license test car, opponent car. And what I discovered was pretty much what I was expecting. Almost every car fits into at least one of these categories. Emphasis on almost. Because there is one model that doesn't get used for anything, which I believe makes it undoubtedly the most irrelevant car in GT3. That model in question is the 2001 Acura CL Type-S. Yep. Well, I said that this final entry was going to be something different, and by different, I meant boring. Yes, the Acura CL is not particularly interesting, but I think that's what makes it being an outlier in GT3 kind of fascinating. Now, I know what some of you will be thinking. You can just buy this car from the dealers if you really want to, so what's the big deal? Well, even then, I struggle to think of any situation in which you would. This model does have the distinction of being the most powerful front-wheel drive road car, which is something. However, its relatively high weight means that its performance is lackluster. If you're looking for a car that ticks all of the same boxes, you would almost certainly go for the Integra Type R instead, which is also quite a bit cheaper. Basically, unless you have some sort of affinity for this model, there is no reason to drive it. I'm willing to bet that 95% of people who've played GT3 have never touched this car or even seen it outside of the dealership. In fact, its lack of visibility when compared to everything else made me wonder whether it was absent from the original Japanese version of the game and only added in later releases. But after checking this myself, no, it is there, which to be honest, only makes me more confused. Now, when I said that the CL was the only car that didn't fit any of my 3 criteria, I wasn't telling the whole truth. There is another, the 1996 Subaru Legacy Touring Wagon GTB. But I don't think it's fair to lump this car in with the CL for 2 reasons. 1, there are other legacies in this game which do get used, and 2, this car is a very common opponent in arcade mode B-class races. I wasn't able to find a definitive list of arcade mode opponents, hence why I didn't include it in my criteria, but I can say that I don't recall ever racing against the CL in this mode either. How this car ended up being so overlooked in this game is a bit of a mystery, but I do have another theory. Alphabetically, the Acura CL is the first car in the game, so is it possible that some coding error caused it to be removed from certain lists, for example, opponents for each event? This is entirely just speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. Beyond GT3, there isn't much else to say about its appearances in future games. The car would return in GT4, where it was joined by its 2003 version, and they were both carried into the PS3 games as standard models. They still weren't used for a whole lot, but you could say that about most cars in these games, so that's nothing out of the ordinary. Interestingly, starting with the PS3 games, a very low-res CL can be found as a scenery vehicle, and it still appears even now in GT7. The model seems to be based on the 2001 version, but with the wheels from the 2003 car. And, well, there you are. That was the story of the least interesting car in Gran Turismo. Understandably, the Acura CL is probably not going to be the car that first comes to mind when you picture Gran Turismo 3. Or maybe it is and you just don't realize it, because there is one small detail that may blow your mind. You know the North American box art for the game? It shows the rear of a car with the GT3 logo superimposed on it. Well, on page 40 of the game's manual, we can find confirmation that this car is in fact the Acura CL Type-S. Yes, to represent the game, they chose the one car that doesn't get used for anything within it. I swear, you couldn't come up with this stuff if you tried.